Throwaway because my boyfriend knows my main and reads literally everything I write. I'm 29F, he's 33M, and if you read nothing else, read this. Yesterday at 2:17 p.m. I watched my boyfriend Matt type an email from my work account to my own HR department, confessing to alcohol abuse at the office, repeated lateness, and an inappropriate relationship with a client. Then hit send, minimize the window, and start deleting the sent message like a magician palming a coin. I was standing behind him in socks, not making a sound, holding a paper bag with 2 chicken noodle soups because he'd texted me at noon that he had a fever and needed lunch. 30 seconds. That's all it took to see what the last 4 months of creeping unease really were. 30 seconds, soup cooling in my hands while he used my machine, my name, my life like a costume he could zip up and walk around in. I didn't shout. I put the bag on the entry table like I always do, stepped back into the hall, opened and shut the door loud enough to announce myself, and then did the performance of my life. "Hey babe," I called, "you awake?" He jolted so violently the chair squeaked, then he pasted on a sickly smile and spun to face me. His skin wasn't flushed. No sweat. A wool throw was draped over his shoulders, but he hadn't bothered to close the laptop all the way. Sticky note stuck to the top edge, 2:30 p.m., send again to HR alias. He stood, arms spread like he expected a hug. I stared at that yellow square like it was a flare fired into a night sky, and I smiled back because I have spent my whole career keeping a client's hand off a panic button with a pleasant tone. I set the soup on the counter and asked if he wanted ginger ale. He said yes, and somewhere in the small talk, thermometer, tissues, the sound of my own voice sounding like it belonged to someone on TV, I slid my phone out, opened my camera, and took a slow photo across the kitchen island. You can see the laptop on the bar stool, the email subject line in the tab, the clock on the microwave blinking 2:17, and his hand still hovering like he couldn't help but touch something that wasn't his. We met 18 months ago at a rock climbing gym. He said I looked like I knew what I was doing. I didn't, not really, but I liked that he saw competence where I saw stubbornness. He worked in operations for a beverage distributor. I manage enterprise accounts at a software company. He was attentive in the way people call boyfriend material, texts in the morning, soups when I was sick, flowers when I closed a big deal. For the first 10 months he was the guy my friend said was good for me. He asked questions. He remembered my sister's dog's name. He laughed at my very dry jokes. But if I scrub the romance off those months and look at what actually happened, it's like staring at a house in daylight and suddenly noticing how every window is a mirror. He was learning me. He was mapping. 4 months ago his lease ended and, temporarily storing a few boxes, at my place seeped into a toothbrush in my cup, his mugs in my cabinet, his hoodie on my chair. I did not say move in. He did not ask. When I suggested he start looking for another place, he got quiet and said he felt rejected. Then he bought a new shower curtain and installed it in my bathroom without asking, and when I said I preferred the old one he said lightly, "Well, things changed, Junebug." I hate that nickname. I told him once, jokingly, that I grew up in a small town, and the whole county called me Junebug from ages 5 to 12 because I always came home with beetles cupped in my hands. I also told him once that it made me feel small. He filed it somewhere and took it out when he wanted the etch. In February I started noticing small glitches. My work laptop takes a password and a facial scan. It sits closed in my office when I'm not using it. 2 times I found it slightly warm when I got home. I chalked it up to updates, to the weird little tech ghosts that dance in the machine when you aren't looking. Twice my email asked me to re-authenticate because you've logged in from a new device. I travel for clients. I've logged in from stranger places than my own office. I told myself I was being paranoid because it's easier to be wrong quietly than right loudly. The first rip in the seam, an email from HR 2 weeks ago asking if I'm okay, that they were here to support me if anything is going on, and reminding me of the company EAP if I felt overwhelmed. I'm good at my job. I'm not perfect, but I'm not sloppy, and I'm not drinking at noon and crying on client calls, which is what the email implied without saying. I scheduled a meeting with HR, and the morning of, Matt made me a smoothie with flax and banana and said he believed in me. I rolled that phrase around my mouth like a seed. Yesterday, migraine at lunch, I grabbed soup and went home. I don't get migraines often. When I do, noise feels like someone has taken my skull off and decided to tap my brain with a ring. I texted him I was on my way and got no response. I thought he was sleeping. I used my key. That's when I saw the email. That's when the 30 seconds started. "Can you pass me a spoon?" he asked now, pretending nothing was wrong, and I passed it to him. He took a sip of broth and made a face like it was too salty. I laughed and said, "You love salty," a normal couple line in a normal kitchen, while my phone buzzed in my back pocket. Sure. New meeting invite. I accepted it with one thumb. There are choices you think you'll make one way, and then when the moment arrives, your body chooses for you. I didn't confront him in the kitchen. I did not go nuclear and scream. I went to my office, shut the door, locked it, opened my work laptop, and checked my sent folder and my security log. There were 3 messages to HR over the past 10 days. Their texts were edited to look like mine. They were weirdly formal in places I write casually and weirdly casual in places I write formally, like a ventriloquist a beat off from the puppet's mouth. IT logs showed successful logins from my machine during hours I was at a client lunch or at the gym. The camera on my laptop had been toggled on and off. My stomach felt like the floor of a moving train. I texted my best friend Kai. "I think something is happening." He replied, "Do you need me to come over right now, or do you need me to keep acting normal while I put pants on?" I typed, "Give me 20. And then I did the ugliest thing I've ever done. I unlocked the hall closet where Matt keeps his climbing gear and his box of random cords, and I went through it. I found 2 USB-C adapters that weren't mine, a cheap USB webcam, and a notebook. That notebook is why I'm writing this on a throwaway instead of somewhere people know me. It wasn't pages of poetry or training logs. It was a ledger of me. He had dates and times of my recurring meetings. He had a chart of my menstrual cycle, which he should not have, since we aren't trying for anything, and that is not something I share with anyone who calls me a bug. He had a list of my clients by last name and an asterisk next to 2 he's heard me complain about, like he was marking where the leverage points were. He had a column called Soften and a column called Pressure, and under Soften were things like flowers after her QBR, cook dinner on quarter close, offer to do laundry, and under Pressure were things like send email to HR if she cancels dinner twice in a week, remind her of moving in plan, bring up money, mention biological clock. He had an entire page about my ailing grandmother, whom he has met exactly once, titled Family Pull, with a list of travel dates and the note, use guilt to nudge. He had another page about leases in my neighborhood, with an arrow next to my building's name and the words renewal window April 1st to 30th. The last page I looked at before I had to sit down was titled Off-Ramp. There were 3 options. 1. Get her fired so she has to rely on me. 2. Get her to quit and start the We're a Team fund. 3. Accident with car? A question mark like a drop of oil. I didn't faint. I did sit on the carpet, put my head between my knees, and let the carpet leave a grid on my skin. From the kitchen he called that he was going to lie down. I said okay in a voice that sounded like it belonged to a woman in a mirror. I took pictures of every page. I took pictures of the webcam and the adapters and my own laptop camera settings. I opened my bank app. Our finances are separate, but a few months ago he'd convinced me to open a Future Experiences joint account where we each put in $200 a month toward travel. There should have been $1,600. There was $72. I scrolled the transactions. Small withdrawals to cash, little drips like someone testing a faucet. The only transfers in? What? Kai texted again, pants on, keys in hand. I typed back, wait. I need to do one more thing. And then I turned on my phone mic and put it face down on the desk because some part of me had been bracing for this without admitting it to myself, and earlier that morning before the migraine, I'd already opened a memo in my notes called If I'm Right. In it there was a list. 1. Record. 2. Don't accuse. 3. Collect. 4. Call HR yourself. 5. Call IT. 6. Call landlord. 7. Call mom. 8. Lock car. I don't remember writing number 8. I walked back into the living room. He was on the couch scrolling his phone. Soup okay? I asked. He said it was fine and reached for my hand. I gave it to him because I wanted him to think the ground under us was still the same ground. He pulled me down beside him and rested his head on my shoulder. You always take care of me, he said. It is a sentence that, on any other day, would make me melt. It made me think of the page called Off-Ramp and whether he'd already picked which one to drive me down. He asked about my day. I told him a small story about a client who tried to renegotiate after signing, and he laughed and said I was a killer. He asked what time my meeting with HR was. I lied and said Friday. The meeting invite was for this afternoon. He nodded like he was rewriting his plan in pencil. Kai texted, "Do you want me to ring your bell in 10 pretending to drop off a charger?" I typed, yes. Do that. And while I waited for my friend to knock and break the spell, I asked Matt if he could hand me my laptop so I could check a flight for my grandmother's birthday. He did without a blink. It's amazing what people will pass you when they think they've already taken what they wanted. I opened Chrome. My saved logins looked normal. My extensions did not. There was one I'd never seen before with a name like a set of random letters. I clicked it and it was an off-brand remote access tool. The developer page was blank. The permissions were full. I took a screenshot. I toggled it off. I opened my email and typed to HR. I did not send those previous messages. I believe my account has been accessed from my physical machine by another person. I would like to meet today. I CC'd IT. I hit send. Then I opened my personal email and typed to myself because I have a superstition that if you write the truth down, it becomes a fact you can hold. Matt sent those messages. There's a notebook. He's been planning. He has an off-ramp with a question mark that looks like a cliff. The doorbell rang. Matt stood like he was going to answer, but I was faster. I opened to Kai, who held up a phone charger like a prop and smiled that big toothy grin that made my high school art teacher call him dangerous. Forgot this, he said. Mind if I use your bathroom? I let him in, and as he passed he squeezed my elbow like he was locating my pulse. In the hall, while Matt fetched him a glass of water he didn't need, Kai whispered, "Do you need out?" I whispered back, "Not yet," and the look he gave me was the look of a friend remembering every time you've ever said, "I'm fine," and meant, I am standing in a burning building trying to decide which doorway is a real door. He left 3 minutes later the way he came, with a casual text you later, and I pretended everything was normal for exactly 11 more minutes. Because at 2:45 p.m. my phone buzzed again with an email, this time not from HR but from my leasing office. Per your earlier call, we've attached the co-tenancy form with both names. Please sign by Friday to ensure your rent stays at the current rate. I did not call them earlier. The attachment had my name in the typed signature block and his. The body of the message said, "As discussed, we're excited to formalize Matt moving in." The timestamp of the earlier call was 11:09 a.m., when I was at my desk approving a scope of work and he, apparently, was at my home approving my life. I didn't look at him. I went to my office, closed the door, and called my leasing office back on speaker. "Hi," I said, voice steady enough to impress a surgeon. "I did not authorize any change to my tenancy. Please remove that form and put a note on my account that no changes can be made without an in-person visit and photo ID." The manager hesitated, said, "We spoke to a man who had your information." I said, "Someone who is not me will not be making decisions about my lease. Do you understand?" He understood. He said they recorded calls. I asked him to please keep that one. When I hung up, there was a knock on the office door so soft it sounded like a guilt. "Junebug," he said, and I swallowed a shudder. "Everything okay?" I said yes. He tried the handle. It was locked. He said light, locked out. I said light, on a call. I emailed HR again. "I would like to do this in person. I will bring my device. Can you meet at 4 o'clock? They said yes. IT said they'd bring a forensics person. My heart said run. I packed my work bag. I didn't pack my overnight bag. I put the notebook in my tote between a water bottle and a copy of a novel I'd been pretending to read for 3 weeks. I took a photo of the hallway camera above the elevator in case I needed to remember who saw me leave. I opened my trunk and put my bag inside, and only then did I check my rear tires because of the question mark that won't leave my head. They looked fine. I took another photo anyway. I buckled my seatbelt, put the car in reverse, and then paused, foot on the brake, because my phone buzzed with an email from an address I didn't recognize. Emily.Carter1989 at a domain I will not post here. The subject line was, "You don't know me, but you need to hear this about Matt." I didn't open it. Not yet. I drove to the office with both hands on the wheel, reciting my own name like I was pinning it to my shirt. When I got to HR, the director was waiting with the IT lead and a woman with a quiet face who I think was legal. I handed them my laptop and my photos and the notebook and the lease email and the list called if I'm right. I watched their faces change in the same order mine had. Skepticism, interest, concern, the slow press of a truth you didn't want flattening your morning into a different shape. They asked if I felt safe going home tonight. I said yes because I still believed in being fair. The legal woman tilted her head like a bird and asked if I could stay with a friend. I said yes because I also believe in not being stupid twice in one day. On my way out I opened the email from the stranger because curiosity is either a step toward safety or a nail in a coffin, and I couldn't know which until I read. The first line: "We dated for almost 3 years. He did something similar to me. If you have time, please call." I stood in the block of sun on the sidewalk and dialed. She answered on the first ring and said my name without asking who it was, like she'd practiced. She told me her name was Emily and she'd found my number the same way people find everything they aren't supposed to find if they believe they deserve it more. "I'm not here to make trouble," she said, "and people who say they're not here to make trouble are always carrying a suitcase full of it. I just thought you should know," she said, "that when I told him I wasn't ready to move in, I lost my job 2 weeks later for sending unprofessional emails to clients that I didn't write." She paused, like she was waiting to hear if I would put the pieces together. I didn't speak. She said, "I didn't have proof. I only had this feeling like I was being squeezed through a hole that kept getting smaller." And then she told me the part that made my scalp go cold. After she left him, she discovered a credit card in her name with a balance she didn't recognize. "It took me 6 months to unwind," she said. "I'm not saying he did that to you. I'm saying you should check." I said thank you. She said I was welcome in a voice that sounded like the road after a storm. We hung up. I opened my credit app and waited while the little wheel spun and my reflection in the glass looked back at me like a witness I didn't trust. The screen loaded. There was a new inquiry from last month from a bank I don't use. I was still staring when my phone buzzed again. It was my leasing office manager texting, which he never does. "We reviewed the call recording. The caller knew your SSN and your mother's maiden name. Would you like us to flag your account as requiring in-person only?" I typed yes, and then I typed another yes, and then I called my bank, and then I called my mother, and then I called Kai and said, "Can you meet me at my place in 20 minutes and then stay until morning?" He said, "Do you want me to bring my baseball bat or my charm?" I said, "Both." I drove home with my mouth full of copper. When I opened my door, Matt was at the counter cutting limes, like he was making us margaritas because the weather was nice and everything was fine. He looked up and said, "Hey, I thought I'd make tacos," and then he saw my face and set the knife down slow. "What's wrong, Bug?" he said soft. And I said the most dangerous word in the English language when you mean it: no. The no hung in the kitchen like a wire. He blinked, then smiled, then tilted his head, which is something he does when he's choosing which version of himself to be. "No to tacos?" he asked, or maybe he meant, no to the world built of small kindnesses he could point to later and say, "See, I took care of you, I didn't do anything wrong." "No," I said again, and you'd be amazed how that one syllable can grow teeth when you repeat it. He reached for my hand. I didn't give it to him. He looked not wounded but surprised, like a magician whose audience refuses to gasp. "I'm heading to Kai's tonight," I said, and when he opened his mouth I added, "I already spoke to HR. That did it." His face flickered between indignation and a plaintive half-laugh. "HR?" he said, as if everyone knows HR is for people who can't navigate life without a chaperone. "About what?" I said nothing. Silence is an answer. He tried another door. "You got my email about the lease, right?" The casual sloppiness of my email made something inside me align. "No," I said. "I got the leasing office's email about a call they recorded from someone who is not on my lease, authorizing changes. That is fraud, Matt." He flinched just slightly at the word. Then he smiled like we were sharing a joke no one else would get. "Babe, I was trying to help. You hate paperwork." "I don't hate paperwork. I hate people making choices and calling it help." I told him I would not be discussing anything further tonight. I told him I would be sleeping elsewhere and that he could pick up the rest of his boxes this weekend when I was home or next week when I was not. Those were his options. His hands went flat on the counter like he was steadying a table. "You're overreacting," he said, a classic line delivered in the tone of a man who thinks he is narrating your brain better than you are. "You've been stressed. You said you had a migraine. You're making connections that aren't there." I said, "Do not tell me what is or isn't there." He said, "I'm not," and then the intercom buzzed and he jumped like someone had tugged a string attached to his spine. I walked to the panel and pressed the button. "It's me," Kai said. You can hear him smile when he talks. "I brought charm and a bat as requested." I buzzed him in, and when I turned back, Matt's face had changed again. He looked relieved. He thought he could triangulate me with another person in the room. Kai walked in carrying a paper bag and an energy that says I will defuse a bomb by complimenting it. "Hey man, he said to Matt Breezy. Thought I'd save you from Junebug's tyrannical tacos. And the way he said that nickname, light, owned, with enough inside joke history to make it land differently, made Matt bare his teeth a fraction. We're grabbing her for the night, Kai said, like we were all on the same adventure and he was the driver. He put the bag on the counter and pulled out lime seltzers and a wedge of fancy cheese and a small plant with purple leaves that drooped in the sweetest possible way. Housewarming for wherever we end up sitting, he said. I almost cried at the plant. It's stupid, but a living thing handed to you gently in a kitchen where nouns have been made into weapons feels like a rope tossed over a wall. Matt said he didn't understand why I was leaving. I said I didn't owe him understanding. He said he needed to explain. I said he could email me. He said he'd already emailed me, and the way his eyes flicked to my office made my mouth taste like pennies again. We moved through the motions. I packed a bag while he hovered in the doorway like a shadow with opinions. Kai made conversational noise in the living room about a documentary he'd recommend just to fill the space. My phone lit up with a voicemail from HR confirming tomorrow morning's meeting with legal. I put the notebook back in my tote, zipped it, and carried it past Matt's face. He did not reach for it. He did put his hand on my arm. Kai crossed the room and put his hand on my shoulder in a way that said we are a chain. At the door, Matt said softly, June, you're being cruel. It's incredible how that word can be asked of the person who has spent the last hour not flipping the table into the ceiling. I said, I'm being careful. He said, you're going to regret this when you realize it's just a misunderstanding. I said, if that's true, then you have nothing to worry about. He smiled in a way that made me remember how warm I used to feel being the sun he oriented to, and how that warmth had slowly revealed itself to be a heat lamp. Kai drove us 3 blocks and then parked, turned off the engine and let the silence pool. I handed him the notebook. He flipped through pages and swore softly. Pressure, soften, he read. He plotted you like a sales funnel. He stopped at off-ramp. We're not going to pretend that third bullet doesn't exist, he said, but we're also not going to catastrophize a question mark into a prophecy. I nodded because the human brain, when it sees a cliff, wants to jump to see if it's real. We're going to do steps, he said. He calls me a recovering list hater. Tonight I was a supplicant at the altar of bullet points. We froze my credit. We set up a password on my leasing account that is not my mother's maiden name or my first dog. We turned on 2-factor authentication on everything. He stayed on speaker while I called my bank and said a verbal passphrase, which I chose by picking 3 words and putting them together. Violet lattice window. The banker read it back like a prayer. We ordered a new set of locks. We texted my neighbor to ask if she'd seen anyone fiddling with my door when I wasn't there. She said no but asked if I wanted her to water my plants while I was gone. The plant Kai brought sat on his coffee table like a witness. At 10:12 p.m., Matt started texting from a number I didn't recognize. First, I'm sorry. Then, I panicked about losing you. Then, we can fix this if you stop making it a legal thing. He should not have used the word legal. It made something in me click into place like a seatbelt. I did not respond. He called. I declined. He sent an email with the subject please, and the body, I know what this looks like but I need you to trust me. It is a sentence that would have worked on me last month. It slid off me now like oil on slate. I slept at Kai's on his couch so his ridiculous dog could put his head on my feet and anchor me like a sandbag. At 2:43 a.m., my phone lit up with a notification from my bank. Unusual activity attempt blocked. Someone had tried to add an external account to my checking. A second later, an email arrived from the leasing office. Second attempt to modify tenancy rejected. Please confirm you are not making this request. I typed yes with my eyes still closed. At 7:50 a.m., there was a knock on Kai's door. 2 uniformed officers stood there. Wellness check, the taller one said. We received a call that a woman named June may be in crisis and needs immediate assistance. Matt had said he would never cross certain lines. He'd apparently brought a measuring tape. Kai looked at me. I nodded. I stepped forward, said my full name, my date of birth, and the words, I am not a danger to myself or others. I am safe, I am housed, and I did not request this check. The officers were good. They asked if they could step in. Kai said we'd talk on the porch. They asked if there was someone else concerned about me. I said a man I was ending a relationship with might be upset, and I showed them the notebook through the storm door without handing it over. One officer made a face that read as older sister. "Would you like to file a report?" she asked, and there it was, the fork. I told her I would be going to my employer and a lawyer this morning and that I would likely be filing later today. She gave me her card and wrote her cell number on it. "If he shows up here," she said, "call dispatch and then text me." 5 minutes after they left, my phone buzzed with a text from Matt. "Police? Seriously?" I blocked that number too. I opened Emily's email again and wrote back, "Can we talk again this afternoon?" She replied immediately, "Anytime. Also, check your car." We drove to my place at noon with Kai's bat under his coat and my stomach in a fist. I told myself I was being dramatic. I told myself I was giving too much power to a scribble. We parked. We walked around to my spot. The right rear tire had a shallow puncture along the sidewall like a bite. Not slashed. Subtle. The kind of damage you could call a curb if you were tired and not looking. I crouched and stared and felt the top of my head leave my body. "Maybe you hit something," Kai said, because he lives in the world where most people bump into more things accidentally than they puncture on purpose. I nodded like I believed. Then I took a photo and texted it to the officer with the note, documenting this just in case. We didn't go up. We drove straight to a tire shop and I let a man named Hector run his finger along the cut and tell me without drama that it looked introduced. That was his word. "See how clean," he said. "A curb leaves a fuzzy edge. This is like a knife maybe or something straight." He could not say who or when. He could say I should not drive on it. He replaced it. I kept the old one in my trunk because evidence is a thing you think about when your life has started to rhyme with other people's bad stories. At one, I sat in a conference room with HR, IT, and legal. We made a timeline. I cried once and then I didn't. IT found the remote access tool and a keystroke logger disguised as something innocent. They took my laptop and gave me a loaner. Legal asked if I wanted a restraining order. I asked if I could think for an hour. I called my mother who lives 3 states away and told her enough to make it real without making her panic. She said, in the voice she uses when she is moving furniture by herself, "Send me a list." I love that woman. At 3, my leasing office manager called. "We flagged your account in our system. We also flagged his. He won't be allowed on the property after today." After today. I heard it like a drum. At 3:30, my neighbor texted that a man was at my door knocking. She sent a blurry photo taken through her peephole. It was him. He had flowers. Later he had nothing. Later he slid down the door and sat on the floor like a student in detention. He stayed until 5. Then he left. When he was gone, my neighbor sent a second photo, an envelope under my welcome mat. The handwriting on the front, my name and a line in parentheses, "Please read." I told her to leave it. I told her I would pick it up with tongs. At 6, Emily called. This time we talked like women crossing a river using each other's shoulders. She told me things I will not post because they are hers. She told me he had once shown up to her work with lunch every day for 2 weeks, and the day she told him to stop, an anonymous complaint showed up about her inappropriate boundaries with vendors. She told me she had thought she was going crazy. I told her I had worn that jacket too. She paused and then said, "If you plan to press charges, I'll give a statement." The sentence hung between us like a bridge rope. At 7, I called the officer and asked how to file. She said I could come in now or tomorrow. I said tomorrow because I had to do one thing first. I had to go home with Kai and a locksmith and change my locks and collect that envelope like hazardous material. We met the locksmith at 8. He was a large man with a gentle voice who did not make me feel silly for asking him to install a longer strike plate. We opened my door. The apartment looked the same in the way a set looks the same when the house lights come up. I picked up the envelope with a spatula and slid it into a gallon Ziploc. I knew I would not open it. I signed the invoice, tipped too much, and asked the locksmith to come back tomorrow to switch the lock on my storage unit. He said sure. He said he'd seen worse. I believed him. It didn't help. At 9, my phone vibrated with a new email from a Gmail address with his name hidden in a string of numbers. Subject line, "I can explain." There were 3 attachments. A screenshot of the HR emails, his version, a PDF of the co-tenancy form and signed, and a photo of us laughing on my couch in January. The body, "June, I'm scared. I panicked. I felt you slipping. I tried to fix it. I overcorrected. Please don't ruin my life because I made a mistake." Somewhere in a city with too many lights, a choir of men sings that chorus every night and thinks it's a hymn. I typed a reply in a notes app and did not send it. I am not ruining your life. I am stepping out of the one you were building around me like a cage. I deleted the draft because I don't send free lines to people who will use them as scaffolding. At 10:30, my phone buzzed with a notification from my car's cheap dashcam motion sensor. There was a figure moving near my space. I tapped into the live view. The camera is terrible at night. The figure could be anyone. The footage caught a face for 1 second as a car turned and its headlights washed the lot. It was him, looking straight at the camera like he knew which eye to stare into. He didn't touch my car. He stood for a minute and then walked away. I sent the clip to the officer. She wrote back, "Thank you. Keep your doors locked. Call if he makes entry." I slept 3 hours and dreamed of doors. In one, the handle came off in my hand. In another, it was made of glass and I could see him through it, smiling. I woke at 4:12 a.m. with my heart stamping and texted Kai, even though he was asleep in my guest room, "You still up?" He replied instantly, "Always when you are," because he's a raccoon in a man's suit. "Want tea?" We sat in my kitchen at 4:20 drinking mint and not speaking. Dawn's first gray was in the window like a friend who hasn't showered. At 7:05 a.m., I called my boss and told him I'd be late and that there was a situation, and to his credit he said, "What do you need from me?" I said, "Cover. Patience. A little faith." He said, "You have it." I cried again and then I didn't. At 9, I walked into the station with the notebook, the tire, the photos, and the envelope in a bag. I told the story. I watched Detective Miller, short, buzz-cut, eyes like someone who buries their own grief 6 inches deep, take notes. He didn't write crazy. He wrote timeline, and documented, and pattern. He asked if there were prior incidents. I told him about the wellness check. He nodded. He asked if I wanted a protective order. I said yes and filled out the forms with a hand that only shook once. At 10, I sat in my car with the radio off and Emily on speaker because we had decided together to put ourselves in the record. We spoke to the detective separately. She cried once and then sounded like polished wood. At 11, I met with my company lawyer because this is bigger than a bad breakup and smaller than a crime wave, but it is exactly the size of an early warning that sometimes goes ignored until it becomes a headline. He asked if I wanted to pursue charges about the computer intrusion. I said yes. He asked if I wanted to involve a civil attorney about the attempted tenancy fraud. I said I didn't know yet. He said, "You don't have to know today." At noon, I ate half a sandwich and tasted none of it. At 1, my sister called and told me Mom was en route whether I wanted her or not. I said okay. The older you get, the more you understand that sometimes being loved is not a conversation. At 2, the officer texted that they'd tried a voluntary interview with Matt and he declined. At 3, he filed a cross-complaint alleging harassment by me. Of course he did. The first time you learn how easy it is to lie on paper, you are a danger to anyone who believes paper is sacred. At 2, the officer texted that they'd tried a voluntary interview with Matt and he declined. At 3, he filed a cross-complaint alleging harassment by me. Of course he did. The first time you learn how easy it is to lie on paper, you are a danger to anyone who believes paper is sacred. At 4:30, I opened the envelope. I know. I said I wouldn't. But if you've ever held the sealed thing someone leaves like a grenade disguised as an apology, you know that curiosity is both the fuse and the pin. I put on gloves because this is the world we live in now, and I slid the letter out. It was 3 pages handwritten. The first page was all flowers, how much he loved me, how much he'd never felt safe before me. The second page turned, I'd been distant, I'd been traveling too much, I'd made him feel unstable. The third page was the knife. If you take this to the police, you will regret it. Not a threat, he wrote in parentheses, just a fact. His handwriting is neat when he wants it to be. At the bottom, a postscript, I replaced your tire because I noticed a cut. I stared at the line until the words floated. I called the officer and read it out loud. She said, "Save the envelope. Don't respond." I said, "He's not stupid." She said, "He's not as smart as he thinks he is." I wanted to believe her. I still do. At 6, my mother arrived with a suitcase and a casserole because some tropes exist because they are useful. She hugged me so hard I forgot where my edges were. She looked around my apartment like a general inspecting a field. She moved a chair and said, "This is wrong here," and somehow that helped. At 8, there was another knock at the door. We looked at each other. Mom mouthed, "Don't." I peered through the peephole. It wasn't him. It was my neighbor holding a small box. "This was put in your mail slot," she said. The box was a phone. Cheap, prepaid, wrapped in a rubber band. On top, a sticky note. Call me. Don't use your phone. I turned the box over in my hands. I have never felt more like a character in a bad thriller. Mom said, throw it away. I said, I'm going to call the number from a different device on speaker with a detective listening. She said okay because she raised me to use the tools I have. I called the number from Kai's phone in his kitchen with the detective on the line. It rang twice. He answered. His voice was so normal that for 1 second my brain tried to convince me that this was all a misunderstanding and we were two people who'd built a Rube Goldberg machine of overreactions. Bug, he said, and my hand closed into a fist. I got scared when I heard you talk to the police, he said. They twist things. I said nothing and let the air between us do the work. He said, I didn't hurt your tire. I saw it and I replaced it. I was trying to take care of you. He said, I only called the wellness check because I was worried. He said, if you drop this, we can start over. He said, I'll show you the messages that prove it was a miscommunication. He said, I'll sign anything that says I won't touch your accounts. He said, all in the span of 60 seconds, every verb of a man who thinks he can narrate reality into a shape that fits the room he already furnished. The detective texted me, keep him talking. So I asked, what about the emails to HR? He said, I sent one message because I was concerned. The others weren't me. I said, what about the co-tenancy call? He said, I was trying to help lock in your rate. I said, what about the notebook? He said, I journal to manage my anxiety. I said, what about Emily? There was a silence like a winter from space. Then, Emily is unstable and hates me. The detective texted, we have enough to move. End call. I hung up. I looked at Mom. She looked at me. And then the detective called, not texted, and said, we're issuing an emergency protective order now. He's going to be served tonight. Stay put. He hung up before I could cry with relief that felt like fear's identical twin. At 9:30, the officer texted a photo of the served order with a scribble of his signature looking like a lie that knew it had been caught. At 10, my phone buzzed with a final email. If you think this is over, you underestimate me. I forwarded it to the detective. He replied, documented. At midnight, I lay in the dark and thought about the version of me from 6 months ago who would have read that last email and thought, maybe I am being dramatic. I wanted to go back and put my hands on her shoulders. I wanted to tell her to screenshot everything. I wanted to tell her that the feeling you get when someone shifts the picture frames in your house a centimeter to the left is not nothing. It is the beginning of a story. But which ending? At 12:07, my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize from an out-of-state area code. I let it go to voicemail. The transcription said, this is Detective Alvarez from City Redacted. We're calling regarding a complaint file from 2021 involving a Matthew, last name. Please return our call. My chest went tight and then wider. Another thread. Another woman? Another city? The pattern is a spider web you don't see until the dew. The next morning, a different envelope was taped to my door. Not his handwriting. Inside, a photocopy of a police report from 2 years ago in another county, a name blacked out with a thick marker, and the note, he doesn't stop. I called Detective Miller and placed the envelope on his desk at 10:30. He tapped the top like you tap a sleeping dog to see if it will stir. We'll follow up, he said. In the meantime, tighten your circle. He looked at me with the grim gentleness of someone who has watched too many good people spend months arguing with a ghost about what the wind feels like. At noon, my boss asked if I wanted to be on leave. I said no. Work is a cathedral with a roof. He nodded and said, then we'll build you an umbrella inside it. IT replaced my machine. Legal drafted a letter to Matt instructing him not to contact any employee of my company for any reason. Security put my name on a list. HR connected me with the EAP and gave me a stack of referrals. One counselor answered on the first ring and said she could see me at 3. I sat on her couch and watched her plants absorb light and told her everything and then told her again because sometimes telling is how you pry the story out of your bones where it wants to root. At 5, I walked home with my mother and Kai. We checked the mail slot before stepping inside. Empty. We checked the windows. Locked. We set the alarm. We made pasta and ate it standing at the counter because chairs felt like a commitment. At 8, I took a shower with the new curtain I had chosen. The water on my back felt like a stamp that said mine. At 9, I sat down to write this because if I don't put it somewhere outside my body, I'm going to choke on it. AITA for pressing charges, for calling HR, for changing my locks, for asking for an order, for refusing the apology letter, for reading the letter anyway, for believing the notebook more than the mouth that wrote it. I know the chorus that will sing. Relationships are messy, you should communicate, you shouldn't involve the law unless there's violence. And maybe you are right if you have never had your name used like a crowbar. Maybe you are right if you've never watched someone map you like terrain and then dig where you are soft. At 9:30, my phone rang with Detective Alvarez again. I answered. She said, "We have 2 complaints in our system that look related. We're coordinating with your local department." She asked me to confirm a few details about dates and places I've never been. She said, "Thank you for making the record." And then she said a sentence I'm going to hold between my teeth like a match until it lights something useful. People like this count on you feeling crazy. Paper cuts them. At 10, I turned off the lights. At 12:15, a car idled outside my window for 3 minutes and then drove away. At 2, I woke to a dream where my name was spelled wrong in every document and no one would fix it. At 4, I remembered that paper can be corrected and I got up and made a new list. Replace the front camera, talk to a lawyer about civil action, ask leasing office for copies of recorded calls, send the tire to a lab if needed, wait for the call from the DA, buy a second plant. At 7, I opened my door to leave for work and there was a single lime on the doormat, uncut, bright as a stoplight, sitting on a sticky note with one word in neat letters, talk. I don't believe in omens. I do believe in patterns. I picked up the lime with a paper towel, put it in a Ziploc and started my car. It started. The radio came on mid-song. The morning was ordinary. The morning was mine. At the second light, someone honked behind me for not accelerating fast enough. I pressed the gas. I pressed record. And I kept going. 2 things can be true. I am tired and I am very good at being a witness in my own life. I'm writing this in a way that looks calm because I have decided that calm is a weapon. The next week moved like a line of dominoes arranged by a hand I could finally see. On Monday, the DA's office called to say they were reviewing charges for unauthorized access to a computer, attempted fraud related to the lease, and stalking, the last of which someone on the phone defined in a way that made me feel both seen and rearranged. A course of conduct directed at a specific person that would cause a reasonable person to feel fear. I am a reasonable person. I feel fear. I also feel stubborn as a church door. On Tuesday, IT traced the keystroke logger to a download done on my network 2 months ago while my machine was awake and I was on a flight to Phoenix. The MAC address didn't match my laptop. I sent the serial numbers of the adapters I found in his cord box. The IT lead made a sound like a man who has just caught a fish with his hands. He left his fingerprints in the RAM, he said. People always do. On Wednesday, the civil attorney my company recommended met me for coffee and didn't charge me for the first hour because she said she likes to win and my binder, Kai made me a binder, looked like a win. We went over the tenancy attempt, the emails, the letter, the lime. The lime? She said, eyebrows up, and I said, yes, I am not being poetic, and she wrote lime on her legal pad and underlined it twice. We can petition for a permanent restraining order after the emergency one, she said. We can file a civil claim for intentional infliction of emotional distress if we want. We can ask for costs. She paused. We can also do nothing and keep the record ready. The power in that word can is an electricity that hums quietly enough you might miss it if you prefer your power with symbols. On Thursday, the officer called to say they'd attempted to interview Emily's ex-landlord and he had provided a copy of a letter he'd received in 2021 authorizing a co-tenancy. The signature was not hers. The notary stamp was fake. The pattern is not an art. It is a stencil. On Friday, HR closed the internal investigation with the sentence, "We find no fault on your part and have taken steps to protect your accounts." My boss told me to take the afternoon off. I didn't because work holds me by the ribs and reminds me I am more than an object that can be moved on someone else's spreadsheet. I did, however, buy a second plant on my lunch break. A stubborn little snake plant that looks like a row of green knives standing at attention. I put it on my windowsill at home between the violet leaf from Kai and the small cactus my sister mailed with a sticky note that said, "Care instructions, be cruel." Made me laugh. Humor is a lever arm. Saturday, my mother made pancakes and hummed the hymn she hums when she wants to fill a room with something that isn't fear. I almost convinced myself we were normal. Then at 10:13 a.m., A new email arrived from an address with numbers that meant nothing, with a subject line that said, "Last chance." The body: "If you do not meet me to talk, I will make sure your employer knows what you really are." It would have rattled me a week ago. Now it made me mad like a snap string makes a note go new. I forwarded it to the detective and to my lawyer. I wrote nothing in the body because sometimes a blank page is a dare, and I am done accepting those. Saturday afternoon, Emily texted that she'd found the courage to call her own detective again. "It sucked," she wrote, "but also it felt like sweeping glass into a dustpan." I told her I was proud because the women in my life are building a quilt out of sentences that say, "With the patience of rain, I hear you, I see you, this is real." Sunday night, the emergency protective order held and my door did not get knocked on and my car stayed a car and not a lesson. I slept the kind of sleep where you wake up and don't remember your name for 3 seconds and it feels like relief because your name hasn't been used as a tool yet today. Monday morning, a court date appeared on the calendar like a flag. My lawyer prepped me for the hearing on the permanent restraining order. "He will likely show up," she said. "He will likely look like he is auditioning for the role of contrition." I said okay. She said, "He may bring letters." I said, "I have paper too." In the hallway outside the courtroom, he stood with his hands folded like a student who thinks he can extra credit his way out of calculus. He looked smaller. He looked like a man. It should not have surprised me that he looked like a person and not a monster. Monster is a story we tell to make it easier to put the key in the lock. People are harder. He glanced at me. I did not glance back. My mother squeezed my hand hard enough to leave little moons in my palm. Kai stood behind me like a door frame. The hearing took 23 minutes. The judge read the filings. My lawyer said pattern, and evidence, and continued contact. The detective said course of conduct. The judge asked him if he had anything to say. He started with, "I love her." The judge held up a hand. "This is not that hearing," she said. He pivoted to misunderstanding, and wellness check, and tire I replaced. The judge's face did not change, but the clerk's mouth did a small grimace that felt like a secret handshake with the women in the room. The judge granted the order for 1 year. No contact, no proximity within 300 feet, no third-party messages, no new numbers, no notes, no gifts, no limes. She didn't say that last part. I said it to myself and felt my mouth smile without my permission. When we walked out, he called my name. You should not have. The bailiff didn't like it. My lawyer didn't like it. I didn't like that my spine did its old reflex of turning toward the sound because that's what a body does when its name is said. But I did turn. He said, "You did this." As if that could be an accusation. As if the system wrote itself in my handwriting. I didn't answer. I looked at him for exactly as long as it takes to remember you are not a room someone else can furnish, and then I walked to the elevator and pressed the down button like I was turning off a light. That afternoon I met with the DA's office. A young prosecutor with a calm voice asked me if I would be willing to testify if charges moved forward. I said yes. He said that sometimes these cases don't make juries lean forward because they lack the blood that makes people understand. He said paper makes some people snore. I said, "You said, people like this count on you feeling crazy. Paper cuts them," and he blinked, surprised, and then smiled like he recognized his own line reflected. "We'll do what we can," he said. "You did the right thing." Meanwhile, life kept doing what life does when it isn't being held hostage by a plot. My client signed the renewal. My grandmother sent me a photo of her garden with the caption, "Look, onions." My sister mailed me a tea towel that said, "No" is a full sentence, and meant it. Kai texted me pictures of the dog asleep on the floor in positions that would require a chiropractor for any human. Mom returned home and called me morning and night because she is a bell that knows which tower she hangs in. And then the part you've been waiting for if you've made it this far. Yes, something else happened. No, it wasn't dramatic in the way movies are. It was uglier and smaller and more real. A week after the hearing, an email went out to 3 of my clients from a newly created address that was my name with 1 letter switched. It said I was leaving the company and that any urgent matters should be directed to a Gmail address that was his name. It was clumsy. It didn't work. 2 clients immediately emailed me and my boss on my real work account to ask if this was legit. IT traced the IP to a cafe 2 neighborhoods over. The DA added it to the pile like a log on a slow fire. He also posted a review on a site where people rate professionals, calling me unethical. Legal sent a takedown. It was removed. The record keeps building a spine. Remember Detective Alvarez from out of state? She called again to say that the anonymous envelope I received matched a complaint they'd received against him 2 years ago that never moved because the complainant moved and didn't want to pursue. Emily decided to speak with Alvarez too. The web connects. None of this is neat. None of it is fast. But there is a steadying in knowing you're not the only person standing in a room pointing at the wire stretched across the floor. This is AITA, so here is the part that always makes people tilt their heads and squint. Am I the asshole for choosing law over love, locks over trust, paper over please? His mother emailed me, I don't know how she got my address, and wrote that I was destroying her son over relationship problems that should have stayed private. She wrote that I would feel guilty when I had a daughter and she couldn't find a good man because women like me criminalized worry. She hit send like it was a stamp. I replied with a link to the Department of Justice page on cyberstalking and wrote a single line. No, my lawyer said I didn't have to respond. I know. Sometimes you do a thing for you. I haven't opened that first apology letter again. I haven't cut the lime. I did, however, plant 2 seeds from the lime in a tiny pot because someone on the internet said you can grow a tree from spite if you water it with patience. I put the pot on the windowsill next to the snake plant. Every morning I check it for a sprout. It hasn't broken the soil yet. Seeds take time even when the story is trying to rush you. 2 days ago I went to the grocery store. Bananas were on sale. That detail will always be funny in a way that feels like a bruise you press to see if it still hurts. He wasn't there. That's not the point. The point is that I walked into a public place with my head up and my name in my mouth and I did not scan the corners like a fox. I bought onions for my grandmother's garden because she likes to start them in cups. I bought a lime because I refuse to be a person who flinches at fruit. I bought a small chocolate bar at the register because I am not above bribes to myself. On my way out, a young woman stopped me. Are you June? She asked, hand twisting in her sleeve. I saw your post. I should have been embarrassed. I should have been suspicious. Instead I said yes because the world keeps us alive with luck and strangers. I think he tried something similar with my friend, she said. She's scared. She thinks she's crazy. I gave her my number and told her to text me and Detective Miller so we could build a triangle. She nodded. She cried a little. I cried a little too because this is how we keep each other from falling into holes that someone else dug and covered with leaves. If you've read to the end, here's the gancho you asked me to tie. He sent me one more message today for words that look like a cliffhanger if you squint. We need to talk. You'll want me to say I blocked it. I did. You'll want me to say I'm safe. I am, in the way anyone is safe, which is to say not perfectly and not forever, but right now, today, with a paper shield I made myself in a circle of people who answer on the first ring. The DA says we may have a plea by summer. Emily says she's sleeping better. My mother says the casserole freezes well. Kai says he's teaching the dog to growl on command, which is theater because the dog is made of pudding. I check the pot with the lime seeds every morning and I think about switchbacks. Paths that take longer but get you up the mountain without tumbling. I think about how my name fits in my mouth like a key now. I think about how, in every room there is a door and it has always been mine to open. So, AITA for choosing a door and walking through it? Or am I finally the person who realized that some apologies are just envelopes with knives in them and some limes belong in the trash and some stories only end when you write the last line yourself?